In 2023, week after week, Israelis flooded the streets. Hundreds of thousands waving blue and white flags and chanting for democracy. They were protesting a government plan to drastically weaken the nation's Supreme Court. At the center of this storm was an 87-year-old retired judge, a man who helped build the court's prestige over decades. His name is Aharon Barak, and once he was hailed as the guardian of Israeli democracy. But now, in the eyes of some, he had become something else entirely.
And suddenly I found myself the enemy of the people, and people demonstrate outside my home against me and in favor of me. I'm still considered by many as the enemy of the people.
How did one of Israel's most respected legal minds come to be painted as a public enemy? Welcome to The View from Mount Scopus, the podcast from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I'm Gilad Halpern. Today, we'll hear the story of the Hebrew University's Faculty of Law, which for the past century has trained the judges, lawyers, and lawmakers who designed and built Israel's legal institutions. Now, those very institutions are under attack. To understand how this came to pass, we'll explore the triumphs and tragedies of Israel's legal system through the story of the law school, including a rare interview with Professor Barak, its former dean. But first, we have to go back to where it all began, a humble classroom in the former monastery, on the eve of a new nation. Jerusalem, 1949. In a vaulted chamber of the Ratisbon Monastery, a group of students sit at desks, listening intently. Through the walls, they can hear monks singing Latin hymns. This unlikely venue was the first home of the Hebrew University's brand new Faculty of Law. But it already had a central role to play, as legal historian Professor Rotem Giladi explains.
From the inception, the Hebrew University was a cultural and intellectual project of the Zionist movement. And when the law faculty was established, it was clear that in practical terms, the goal would be to train lawyers for the civil service of the newly established state. In political terms, the goal was to signify and symbolize Jewish sovereignty, especially in Jerusalem. The speeches that were delivered at the faculty's opening ceremony in November 1949 had emphasized precisely these two goals, by the way. Felix Rosenblatt, the justice minister, titled his speech, Meeting the Needs of the State. At the same time, he also considered the faculty's establishment as an important step towards our social and cultural independence.
Professor Itzhak Englard was one of those early students. Born in Europe in 1933, he came to Israel as a young man and enrolled in the law faculty in 1952, just the fourth class since the faculty's establishment. Englard would later become a renowned professor at the law school and its dean, before joining Israel's Supreme Court in 1997. We met the spry nonagenarian in the book-lined chambers he still keeps in the court, 2 decades into his retirement.
Don't forget that it was a new faculty, but the teachers were outstanding. They all brought with them a lot of legal culture, which influenced later the students who got position in the government after. We were about 300 students in the class. Many of them later were very influential in the legal culture in Israel and the political culture too.
But you yourself also left academia at some point to become a judge. And maybe you can describe this transition from academia to sitting on the bench. And also, what is the contribution of your academic background to your work as a judge?
It was only 6 years at the Supreme Court, and I have always explaining the difference between a professor of law and the justice at the Supreme Court. The difference is justice, his practice is to find a solution for a problem. The function of a professor is to find a problem of the solution. So it's not the same. And when I was a justice at the Supreme Court, I avoided to quote myself on my papers and I concentrated on the facts, not to write articles as a professor, but only this very short decision of a judge. I think one of the most important functions, as I always said, I don't think that a professor of law could be turned into a good justice. And I said I would vote against my own appointment, I always said, because you don't know if a professor who is looking for the problems is able to solve problems. You need to have a potential capacity of deciding, and not all the professors have the decision-making capacity. So when I succeeded, it wasn't because I was a professor, because I probably, again, my genes were okay, and I could decide efficiently and concentrating on the facts and not writing decisions like articles.
In those early years, the atmosphere at the law faculty crackled with a sense of purpose. Israel was a brand new state, improvising its institutions on the fly, and the students knew they were training to become much more than just attorneys. They were future judges, legislators, drafters of laws, nation builders in the most literal sense. The British had left behind a patchwork of Ottoman codes and colonial common law. Now, it fell to the pioneering generations of lawyers to forge a modern legal system for a democratic Jewish state. Even as a young student in the 1950s, Aharon Barak felt this mission deeply. Barak had arrived in Israel as a child survivor of the Holocaust and grew up in Jerusalem. Barak would go on to become one of the most consequential figures in Israeli jurisprudence, but back then he was simply a bright student, hungry to learn.
I must say, the lectures themselves the professors have given were very, very, I think, deep, interesting. And I always thought I was sorry that only 10 or 20 of us were coming out of the 300 to listen to the lectures. I was living with my parents at those days. I didn't work because I thought that this time that I'm free to study and to go to university, if I have time, I should read all the materials the professors gave us to read. So I spent a lot of time in the library, which was also at the law school at the Ratisbon monastery.
My colleague Tal Kra-Oz met with Aharon Barak in his apartment in central Tel Aviv, where he recounted his auspicious early days.
I was supposed to be the clerk of a Jerusalem lawyer by the name of Gideon Hausner, who at that time, when I was released from the army, he was appointed the Attorney General of Israel. So I went to him and asked him if I can continue with him, and he said, of course. And so I was a clerk for the Attorney General of Israel. This continued for some time, and then Eichmann was captured and brought to Israel, and many of my friends were very jealous of me that here I could be at the center of the case against Eichmann. On the other hand, I myself was very upset by being there because it brought back all my memories of what happened to me and to my family in the Holocaust. And therefore, I asked Hausner that he will release me, which he has done. And then I went to other departments in the Ministry of Justice until I finished my clerking and passed the exams for the Israeli bar. At that time, I also applied to the university with the request, with my desire, to serve as an assistant, as the beginning of my career in the academy.
Professor Benjamin Aktzin, who was dean at the time, had other ideas.
To my surprise, Aktzin said, well, young fellow, I'm sure that you will make very well in the private sector. Why should you not go there instead of being a melamed, being a teacher at the school? Well, I told him, look, I want to be a melamed. My mother was a melamed, and I want to be a melamed. So if it's possible, let it be so. And it was possible. I started to teach as an assistant. And since then, my career at the university started.
The 1960s and 70s were a coming-of-age period for the Hebrew University's Faculty of Law. What began as a scrappy operation in a monastery had grown into Israel's premier center for legal education. Aharon Barak had been a star student, but thought the law school was in need of some modernization.
So eventually you became a much more senior professor and the dean. How were you able to change the legal education?
Well, the change came when I went together with another young teacher, Yitzhak Zamir. I finished my PhD at the law school here in Israel. He was finished his PhD in law in England, in London. And so the two of us went to the United States, to Harvard, as a postdoctorate. And we stayed a year in Harvard, where we have seen the way law is taught in America, in one of the best law schools in America. And it was different from the way it was taught in Israel. In some respect, it was better than our law school. The teaching was better, but in other aspects, the teaching was worse. To mention two or three things. First of all, in the United States, there was not this distinction between the professor who gives a class ex cathedra and the assistant who comes and then explains in better details what the professor has said. In America, the way was the Socratic way of teaching, in which the teacher, whether it was a professor, most of the teachers were professors. So the professor was both the guy who gave the class, the ex cathedra lecture, and also the assistant. And it was done in a way that, in a dialogue between the teacher, who asks the students, well, what do you think about this problem that I gave you last class? And the student would answer and would ask another student, and things, there would be a discussion between the law professor, the law professor was also the ex-cathedra teacher and the assistant together. I myself thought that this American system is a good system for some topics, not for all of them. So this was my criticism about the American system. But for teaching contracts and torts, for example, other subjects, the American system was much, much better. So this was one thing which I thought that when I'll come back, I'll bring it to be discussed at the law school.
Barak and his colleagues, nicknamed the Young Turks at the faculty, pushed to incorporate some of these innovations back home in Jerusalem. They didn't append the old European influence system entirely, but they did inject new energy. Eventually, a student-run journal, modeled on the Harvard Law Review, was established, discussion-based teaching became more common, and the rigid curriculum opened up to give students more choices.
So in those years, both as a student and as a member of faculty, many graduates went on to serve in the public sector, and you eventually transitioned to the public sector. And so the faculty had a very important role in shaping those institutions in those years. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I think the way that you described it is right. We know the importance of law for the democracy in Israel. And so every one of us was ready and willing to serve the state in order to help the state in protecting its democracy and human rights. Everyone according to the subject that he was teaching, of course. And it was right not only at the law school, it was right in the whole university. So we had people from the humanities who went to serve in government, etc., ministries. For example, Shlomo Avineri, who studied with me law in the last year of law, but who wrote his PhD in the Department of Philosophy and who was a very important figure at out of the law school, he volunteered and became the Director General of the Foreign Ministry. As far as I'm concerned, I was approached by the Minister of Justice, Tzadok was his name, and he asked me if I'm ready and willing to serve as an Attorney General of Israel, since the Attorney General at that time, Meir Shamgar, was appointed to the Supreme Court. And I asked him, give me time to think about it. And it was for me a very, very hard decision, I must say, because I've seen my future at the law school, at the university. I was a university person. And to leave it and to go to another job was not an easy decision for me. But ultimately I said, okay, I'll do that. But it was agreed between two of us that it's not a long-term appointment. To serve the country several years and then to come back.
And you were quite young at the time.
Yes, I was appointed as Attorney General in 1975, and I was born in 1936, so
You were 39.
Yeah, so I was quite young. And in fact, after 2 years as Attorney General, I said to myself that that's enough for me. But at that time, there was a change in the government that runs Israel. Instead of the Rabin Labor government, we had the Begin Likud government. And I didn't want that the tradition will be established that with the change of government, there is also a change with the Attorney General. So I continued with Begin. I even didn't ask him if he wants me to continue. I continued with him for another year or so until I resigned in 1978. After Camp David, I resigned from my role as Attorney General and became a judge.
Can you talk a little bit about that transition from theory to practice, first as an attorney general and later as a judge? It's a very different set of skills. Obviously, you had deep legal knowledge, but you were managing people. You were doing an entirely different sort of job.
Yes, the Attorney General, an Israeli Attorney General, is a special kind of job that requires specific skills. And when I talked with Tzadok, when he asked me to go to become Attorney General, I said, look, the Attorney General deals with criminal law. I have no experience in criminal law. Or with public law, administrative law, constitutional law. I studied it, but I wasn't teaching it. So I asked him, do you think that it's a good idea? And he said, look, you will learn. You will learn how to do it. Don't worry. And so my first steps there were not easy. I had to learn a lot. But luckily, I had a very close, very good lawyers acting already in the Ministry of Justice that helped me around. And so I think I was able to overcome those difficulties. But even here, when I was asked by the court if I want to go to the court, I was here, again, hesitation. Well, I said, I became Attorney General. My idea was to come back to the university, not to another place. And here suddenly it's another deviation from my dream. And so I went to Guido Tedeschi, who was my mentor. And I asked him, well, what do you say? Because he was asked to become a judge of the Supreme Court in the early 50s and refused. So am I right in saying, I told him that I should also refuse as you? No. He says, mine was a special case. Don't refuse, you should do it. So I took it. But it was not an easy decision.
Barak approached judging with the same philosophy that had guided him as a scholar. The law should serve the needs of a modern, democratic society, and the courts must ensure that the principles of the nation, its unwritten constitution, are upheld even as times change.
A judge in the Israeli Supreme Court, he's a general practitioner, like a doctor. you have to solve the problems that are coming to your courts. We don't have the American jurisdiction in which the court chooses from thousands and thousands of cases, those cases you want to deal with. We have to deal with many, obliged to deal with many of the cases that are coming to the court. And I try to develop, I have seen my role as a judge of the Supreme Court from the first day until I retired at the age of 70. I was 28 years on the court. It's the highest time of a judge serving on the Supreme Court, but one. Justice Landau, I think, served maybe several months more than myself. So I have seen my role to achieve two goals. One is to bridge the gap between law and life. The moment a legal norm is created, it turns out because it becomes the norm is there, but life around it is changing. So I've seen my role to bridge the gap between law and life. And the second role, which became more and more important, is to protect the Israeli constitution and to protect the rights of the Israeli citizen. Those two functions, this was my North Star in judicial functioning. I never said, look, here, this provision in a statute, if you construe it according to the rules of construction, of interpretation that the court has, the result is terrible. But if there is another way to construe it, then we should construe it in such a way that will bridge the gap between law and life. And I was able to develop the purposive interpretation in law, which many, in fact, all the judges of the Supreme Court nowadays go according to it, though they give different meanings to what purposive interpretation in law means. And when the basic laws started to came up, was enacted by our parliament, by the Israeli parliament, who has two functions, as a parliament enacting statutes and as a constituent assembly enacting parts of the constitution. When I started to construe this constitution, I also have seen my role to bridge the gap between law and life, between the constitution and changing of life of the Israeli society, and the second function, to protect the constitution against those who are trying to limit it, to affect it negatively. And therefore I have decided, for example, the most important judgment I gave from the legal point of view is that all the basic laws, and now we have already 12, 13, are constitutional statutes, not regular statutes. They are part of our constitution. And if a regular statute deviates from a basic law, this deviation may be considered unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in fact, any court, but things are coming to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court can decide if this deviation is constitutional or unconstitutional.
Under Barak's leadership, the Supreme Court in the 1990s took a more activist posture. It struck down government actions that infringed civil liberties. It developed doctrines to ensure government accountability and fairness, like the principle of reasonableness in administrative decisions. Most significantly, after the Knesset passed two basic laws on human rights in 1992, Barak led the court in declaring that these basic laws aren't regular laws, that in effect they are chapters of an Israeli constitution. This move, known as the Constitutional Revolution, marked a turning point in Israeli legal history. For the first time, the Supreme Court asserted the power to invalidate ordinary legislation that contradicted the basic laws, such as the right to human dignity and liberty. These ideals had deep roots in Barak's personal story as a Holocaust survivor who cherished the rule of law. The Basic Law on Human Dignity and Liberty, a foundational human rights law, resonated with him in a special way.
When we were in the ghetto, which basically is a jail in which people who were convicted to die were waiting for the day when the conviction will be executed. In spite of this situation, the relationship between ourselves were very, very friendly. We cared one about the other. The Germans were able to kill us, but they did not take our dignity away. And since then, so I think, a second component of my judicial philosophy is the importance of the rights of the individual, the importance of the human dignity of the individual that should be protected and defended everywhere.
Not everyone was pleased with Barak's innovations. Some politicians and jurists criticized him and the court for what they perceived as overreach. To these critics, the court's nullification of laws passed by an elected Knesset was an undemocratic usurpation, a judicial elite imposing its views without public consent. Over the late 1990s and 2000s, this criticism simmered on the conservative and religious right of Israeli politics, where people resented court decisions on issues like settlements, security, and state and religion. Barak, a liberal icon, became a lightning rod for those who argued that the court had swung too far from the nation's traditional values or the will of the majority. Inside the Faculty of Law, however, the work of teaching and scholarship continued apace, often focusing on the balance Barak advocated, applying lofty legal principles to the realities on the ground. By the turn of the millennium, the law faculty was expanding its horizons in new ways. In 2003, it launched a clinical legal education center, introducing practical clinics that allow students to serve real clients and communities under faculty supervision. The clinics cover issues like human rights, disability law, welfare, and more, a hands-on complement to classroom theory. Dr. Shiran Reichenberg, a Hebrew University alumna who now directs the clinical program, explains how it aims to instill a sense of social responsibility in each new generation of lawyers.
Clinical legal education main goals is to teach law students about social responsibility and also to give back to the community that is around us. And we use our legal tools to advance those goals. And we also try to promote the pedagogy in the faculty by connecting the gap between law in books and law in action.
So this is exactly what I'm interested in. What is the gap between the law in the books and the law in action? Maybe you can give an example or two.
We have laws. Some of them are good laws, some of them are okay laws, but the way they are being applied in the everyday life of the people is different sometimes. And we try first to teach our students what it really means to be marginalized populations, people living in poverty, having disability, being youth at risk, all the different scopes of our clinics. And by showing them how the law actually being applied, we first give them a different view of what the real everyday life of the law is, and also the differences between what they study in the classrooms about constitutional law and our basic laws and any other legal scope, how it being applied or not being applied in everyday life.
So, for example,
if I am a child, a youth at risk, and I want to have an ID, but my parents throw me out of the house and they are not in touch with me, even though the law forced me to have an ID when I am turning 16, without my parents, I can't get it. So what do? How do I reach the offices? If I live in the streets and offices are closed when I wake up, how do I can get my services? If I am a single mother and I want to have public housing, what are the demands? If I can get it, do I need to have children? How many children? And if I'm getting an apartment, is it located close to their schools? If I need to change the environment I'm living in, how do I get a social security benefit? What do I have to prove? What are the documents? And if I don't have all the documents, can I receive it? So these are just a brief of examples of.
and these people, these youth at risk, these single mothers, they come to you, and what happens then?
We are legal clinic is run by a lawyer who is an expert in the field of the clinic he operates.
How many other?
We have 9 clinics, and so each clinic has between 16 to 20 students. The students either go to the welfare offices, there are people there to other centers, or because people already know about our activities, they come to us, and the students get the case. They learn the legal materials with their legal supervisor, the clinical legal supervisor, and together they think of the legal strategy. How can we solve it? If it's part of what we do, should we go to court? Should we start with a letter to the authorities? Should we maybe this is like something that happens so many times. We think about changing policy, so we go to the Knesset, we go to the Supreme Court. It really differs between each case and what it needs.
So it's on a volunteer basis. Your clients are not supposed to pay anything. And how do they know to come to you?
Yes, so basically we are the largest pro bono office in Jerusalem because we have 9 clinics and over 1,000 cases each year. They know about us either by the connection that we have with other NGOs or the courts or the welfare offices, and we operate since 2003. I was actually a student at the faculty back then, so I was privileged to do clinic when everything started. And
You're the Jerusalem Erin Brockovich.
yes, Julia Roberts called. No, it's over 20 years that the clinics operate, and people know about our work already. So, and either by their street field workers or other social workers that know about our work, it really changes between each clinic.
It's an introduction to a very rough aspect of living. How are the students taking it?
This is a great question because it's very hard. They come to us on the 2nd or 3rd year in the law school after learning that we have such an important, and we do have an important and established legal system. And then we try to put a mirror in the face and telling them that the reality is not always that great. And we have the best students in the country, and most of them come from privileged places. Not most of them haven't seen what they see in the clinic, so it's hard. We talk to them about it, about the shock they're gonna get, and it's never the preparation is never enough to what they're actually dealing with. We have hard cases, very hard living situation of people. Sometimes they call the students in the middle of the night asking for help, and we are always there to support them. But I think it is important because our students go afterwards to public service and to the general attorney offices, to the public defender, and they need to know that the people they are gonna meet are real people with real life stories, and not that every thing is as it seems. We try to give them curiosity and also a sense of criticism. So with whatever they are looking at, they will rethink, go deeper, and try to see the whole story behind the case.
Today, the law faculty's legacy is visible everywhere. Its alumni have authored landmark Supreme Court rulings and also sat in prison visiting rooms offering pro bono counsel. They've led international law debates at the United Nations and mediated local labor disputes. The faculty had built and shaped Israel's legal institutions at every level, embedding values of rule of law and rights along the way. But as the 2010s turned into the 2020s, those institutions and values were facing unprecedented headwinds.
The View from Mount Scopus is made possible by American Friends of the Hebrew University. Established in 1925, AFHU has provided over a century of partnership and support to Israel's leading institution of higher learning. To learn more, visit afhu.org.
In recent years, a wave of populist politics has swept many democracies, and Israel has been no exception. The clearest target of this populism has been the judiciary, often derided by critics as an unelected elite, out of touch with the people. For those who spend their lives building Israel's legal system, watching this turn of events has been sobering. Justice Itzhak Englard, looking at the trends in Israel and abroad, doesn't mince words.
Yes, I'm very much occupied by the problems we have today. When I was justice at the Supreme Court more than 20 years ago, the situation was completely different. Today, we are suffering from populism. And we are not the only one. Even the United States and many countries in Europe and other countries are going through the same problems of populism, which has been defined as the certain circles are against the intellectual elite. You say elite, yes? And this is one of the, I call it in German, Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist, which means the spirit of time. It's not only here in Israel, but we are suffering from the same phenomenons you are suffering in United States today. I don't want to go into details. You know the public in United States, you know the problems created by the new government, where they are against the Supreme Court justices, the political influence on judiciary, the loss of the judiciary independence, and interference with the orders base, call it checks and balances. You come from United States background. We are losing the check and balances like in many other states. And we are part of the international problem of this, and we have to find a solution. And I would say I'm very hopeful that the next generation will correct what has been done in the last few years and the attempts to destroy the wonderful independency of the judiciary in Israel.
Englard lived through World War II in Switzerland, mere miles from the German border. He remembers the post-war decades when the horrors of fascism and dictatorship were still fresh in everyone's minds. In those days, there was a broad consensus in Israel, left, right, and center, that an independent judiciary was sacred, a bulwark against tyranny. That consensus has frayed. Englard contrasts the mindset of his generation with the climate he sees now.
At my time, the atmosphere is completely different because it was after the Shoah, and you knew about what happened in Germany, how a liberal state can be transformed very shortly into a dictatorial, authoritarian state. So the people were, even the justices who knew the German experience, came from Germany, Jews. They were very aware how important is the judicial independence. And the general atmosphere at the time was different.
In early 2023, Israel's government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Justice Minister Yariv Levin, proposed a sweeping overhaul of the country's judicial system. Key changes included giving the elected government greater control over the committee that appoints judges and curbing the court's ability to strike down government decisions, especially by limiting or abolishing the reasonableness doctrine. Many Israelis saw these changes not as tweaks, but as an existential threat to democratic checks and balances. The Supreme Court, historically one of the only brakes on majority power in Israel's parliamentary system, faced a weakening of its authority. Critics, including Barak, argue the reforms would concentrate political power in the hands of coalitions, reduce judicial independence, and expose minority rights to majoritarian whims.
You obviously didn't write the basic laws yourself, and reading them, it's clear, at least to most people, what the Knesset meant by enacting them, and yet your judgments have become, controversial, and the whole concept of judicial review is under attack. And for some reason, you're still the target of this, even though you're long retired. Why do you think this is?
I think it's quite clear to every person who reads open-minded that our basic laws are constitutionalized. Were constitutionalized. They're not regular statutes, they're constitutional statutes. And therefore, that there is judicial review of them. I continued this tradition, and many people disagree with it, and I can understand them. It's not an easy case. I'm not saying, regrettably, we don't have a section in the basic laws that there is judicial review of the constitutionality of a statute. Apropos, in the American Constitution, there is also doesn't exist such a section. But the American Supreme Court in Melbourne Review Medicine decided that this follows. And so also we decided, in the same way the Americans decided it, that there is judicial review of constitutionality of statutes. And this is a very important decision. And this government we have now decided to change it in their way. They accepted that there is judicial review, in fact. In a way, this is the great victory of me. They decided that there is judicial review, but they want the judicial review to be in their way. And this is reflected mainly in the appointment of judges, which they want to employ in such a way which I think will destroy the whole thing of judicial review. And so there are demonstrations against it by many of the Israelis, and there are demonstrations in favor of it. And suddenly I found myself the enemy of the people, and people demonstrate outside my home against me and in favor of me. After October 7, this demonstration stopped because we have the problem now with the war in Gaza. But I'm still considered by many as the enemy of the people. And so I try my best, A, to help the fight in Gaza and to solve the hostages, and B, to revive the fight against the way this government would like to change the constitution of the State of Israel and make it basically a non-liberal constitution like the one we have in Turkey, the one there was in Hungary, and the one that for many years was also in Poland and in other countries.
It's a scenario that even the founders of Israel's law faculty contemplated in theory. Professor Benjamin Aktzin, the dean who almost denied Barak an academic career, used to quip about the limits of what laws and constitutions can do. Englund remembers an adage of Aktzin's that feels eerily relevant today.
You see, for instance, Aktzin, who was a specialist in administration, I give you only one idea which I never will forget. He was talking about the constitution. And he said constitutions, in England there was no constitution, because gentlemen don't need constitutions. And very bad people, how will you say, shodedim? Brigands, yeah. They doesn't help. They won't observe it. So constitutions are good for little thieves. And as long as we are little thieves, if you have been gentlemen, you wouldn't need it, like the British. But for little thieves, they may be, let's say, influenced by and not doing some bad things under the Constitution. But if you are a brigand, you would say it, yes, then the Constitution doesn't help. And I would say today we are in a situation where we also left the little thieves. Maybe we arrived already at the situation that it doesn't help very much anymore. That was Aktzin's idea.
In other words, the law can only restrain moderately bad actors. It's useless against leaders with no scruples at all. It's a chilling thought, and one that many Israelis found themselves grappling with in 2023. Was their government made up of little thieves who could be checked by some legal framework? Or were they brigands, trampling every norm in the path?
The way that the Minister of Justice represented to the Israeli public the reform he wants to introduce in the Israeli constitutional scheme was so extreme, so out of the blue. It was not a topic that was discussed in the elections that brought the new government. There was a reaction against it. He gave his speech, I think, on Monday. I gave my reaction on Friday. I appeared in all the TV stations. And on Sunday, there was a huge demonstration against it. And it continued. Thousands of people were demonstrating every weekend till October 7. And in October 7, the war started. And instead of saying declaring that while the war goes on, there will be no activity of the government in fulfilling its reform in of the judiciary, they continued it. I think if this government will get its way, what will happen is that in Israel there will be no separation of powers. There will be only two powers. One power is the prime minister, who controls the executive branch, who controls our parliament. We don't have checks and balances between the Israeli parliament and the Israeli government, total control. And on the one hand, and the court, which will be run by the way they want it to be run, which will be their court. So if all this will materialize, what we will have after these elections, if they will win these elections, what we will have is basically a prime minister who has no limitations. You can call it a very honorable person he may be. He may have very good ideas, he may have very bad ideas, but checks and balances we will not have. A democracy we will not have. We, the people, will not have a voice.
The conflict has undoubtedly polarized Israeli society. Families, friends, and co-workers found themselves in bitter arguments, either defending the court or denouncing it. Professor Noam Gidron of the Hebrew University's Department of Political Science specializes in political polarization. He notes that this dynamic is not unique to Israel, and that while polarization is harmful, sometimes it accompanies fights that are necessary. You specialize in polarization in politics. What is really polarization? Why is it? When did it come something to think about?
Yeah, I think it's hard to talk about contemporary politics without also engaging with this notion of polarization, although different people interpret what polarization is actually about differently. Until I think maybe a decade or 2 decades ago, most of the debates about polarization engaged with policy differences, what we call ideological polarization. People have different views about the welfare state, about immigration, and we would say that when we are more polarized, the opinions of people in different political camps are further apart. In the last years, we've seen growing interest in affective polarization, that is, dislike and hostility across party lines or across ideological divides. And this type of polarization is especially disconcerting because it has negative implications not only for politics, but also for social relations, for economic interactions, and maybe even for democracy itself. So what I've been studying in the last couple of years is mostly this affective polarization, how it differs across countries and over time, and specifically in the Israeli context.
Where does this affective polarization stem from?
That's a great question, and you won't be surprised that different people have different views on this issue. First of all, the two types of polarization are likely related. When we more strongly disagree on issues, maybe we also have more negative feelings toward political opponents. But here what we've seen is that there are specific types of disagreement that more easily lend themselves to negative emotions. And when we disagree about economic policies, we can try and find a middle way. But when we disagree about issues related to core values, to identity-related questions, to questions about who we are and what we believe, these are the type of issues that more easily translate into affective polarization. And in recent years, these questions of identity, of who we are, of our core values, have really come to the fore in Western democracies. And therefore, we should not be surprised that we've also seen an increase in affective polarization across many Western polities.
I'm assuming that social media and technology in general plays a huge part in this.
Yeah, that's, I think, the immediate suspect, social media, and it clearly plays a huge role. We know that from experiments, from different type of studies, that indeed social media can generate this type of negative emotion. But I'm also a little bit concerned when we focus only on social media, because then sometimes the next step is to say something like, okay, it's about the media, it's about technology, not much to do about it. And yes, social media matters, But the way elites use social media and how we use social media also plays a role. So social media matters a lot, but we shouldn't use it as an excuse not to think about what we can do and what political elites can do to deal with this issue.
So it's a lot about motivations then. It's whereas affective polarization perhaps was something to look down on and try to contain in the past. Now it's something that people use for their own purposes.
Definitely, political elites used it for their own purposes, although you can ask why haven't they used it before? And I think maybe now there are social norms that more easily allow some elites to do that. Social media plays a role. Maybe the type of political cleavages, those identity-related issues, also lend themselves more easily to generating affective polarization. So it's this constellation of things. We should also note, maybe in the context of social media, that affective polarization has begun to increase in the American context even before anyone knew about Facebook, right? Already in the 90s and actually the 80s and before. So probably social media accelerated this trend, but I'm not sure that that's where the roots cause are located.
So is it people who do it and people who can solve the problem? I mean, it sounds a stupid question, but you know what I mean.
It's not a stupid question at all, and one of the growing fields of research now, not only in political science but across the social sciences, is to think about types of interventions that can lead to a decrease in affective polarization, and that there's a lot of work on this issue. We can say some more about potential remedies to affective polarization, but we should also keep in mind that we need to have a clear idea of what is it exactly that we are concerned about. And polarization has many negative implications for society. We should also keep in mind that political disagreements, even strong political disagreements, are part of what democracy is all about. So sometimes when we immediately jump to the question of how can we all agree, how can we deal with this challenge of polarization, we need to think very carefully about which dimensions of polarization we are most concerned about.
And what is your conclusion?
My conclusion is that sometimes this concern about polarization is too easily translated into the idea that we should focus on the things we all agree about, or maybe that we can identify some areas on disagreement that can be left outside of the political divide. And I think that is very problematic. We do want ideological disagreements. We do want ideological divide between the different parties so people can actually identify with which party they identify and then support it. And we should also keep in mind that some political battles are highly polarizing, but that doesn't mean that they are not just. We should keep in mind that some political battles are highly polarizing and are still worth fighting. Obviously, the fight over civil rights in the US, for instance, was a highly polarized moment. Maybe it is still polarizing to some extent. But probably many of us would think that it was the right cause to fight for. And I'm sometimes concerned that at the moment in which there's so much interest in polarization, and obviously I'm invested in the idea that polarization is important, it shouldn't lead us to push to the sides political divides or political topics that are important and are worth fighting for.
So what should we concentrate on? Creating norms, institutions, everything around that would perhaps set the goalposts of the debate better?
Yeah, well, the easy answer would be all of the above. I think that we need to realize that social media is probably here to stay. We can think about how to regulate it, but we want to think about political institutions that would be able to deal with the challenges of the day rather than think that these challenges are going to disappear. And here, of course, the answers would vary by political context. The US, with its two-party system, is one place where we would expect intense affective polarization because you only have two parties, which is on my side or the other side. In the Israeli context, we have another problem. In some ways, we are the opposite of the US, where in the US you have a very fixed constitution that is practically impossible to change. And in the Israeli context, political institutions are very malleable. And in a moment of high polarization, we should be concerned that when one side is in power, the side can change or reshape institutions to fit its political goals. So maybe in the Israeli case, we need to think about some institutional reform that would help solidify liberal institutions. So it's hard to come up with one solution for all different countries in the world, but I think that there are some institutional reforms that could help us deal with politics in a deeply polarized era.
In early 2024, Aharon Barak had a remarkable judicial swan song, albeit in tragic circumstances, when he agreed to be appointed as Israel's ad hoc judge at the International Court of Justice to hear South Africa's genocide allegations against Israel.
Early last year, this very same government sent you to be an ad hoc judge on Israel's behalf on the International Court of Justice. Without getting into the whole legal proceedings, and things have changed since then, but first, I was very moved to see you there and that you accepted and that you did this at your age and on behalf of this government that has also been vilifying you. But can you talk about that the personal experience?
Ultimately, they came to me and asked me to be the ad hoc judge. And I agreed, kind of poetic justice, that here the traitor is sent to the court. So I came to the court in January 2024, and I served there until the end of 24. I had to resign because my wife was very ill and she passed away later. So I couldn't be outside the house when her life became more in danger. So I had to resign. But when I was there a judge, I tried to do justice according to international law. I haven't seen myself as a representative of Israel, as the other judges, and there are judges there from all over the world, don't see themselves as representative of the countries who made their appointment possible. The appointment is done by the Security Council and the General Assembly. So I have done my best to protect Israel against the claim that Israel's operation in Gaza are genocide. I thought then, and I think now, that Israel's operation in Gaza violated many rules of international law, and the adjudication of this violation should be in the International Criminal Court, the ICC, who is also situated in The Hague. But the army has not committed the crime of genocide. The crime of genocide, which is the crime of the crimes, is a crime that needs an intent of very high level of intent, namely an intent that a group of people shall be destroyed because there's such a group, and there's no other explanation for this destruction of the group. And what happens in Gaza is not an intent to destroy a group, but is an intent to protect Israel from being attacked by Hamas. And I told them that in one of my judgments, I wrote that when a democracy fights terror, it fights it with one hand behind its back, because it fights it with the idea of the rule of law. Now, if we the court, will order Israel to stop fighting in Gaza, you will bind the war against terror with Israel fighting this war with her two hands behind the back. And this is, I think, a result that the court should not accept.
Aharon Barak has lived through the full arc of Israel's existence, from surviving the Holocaust as a child, to helping enshrine human rights in the country, to seeing his life's work challenged. He granted this interview because 50 years after he left academia for the public sector, he still has a special fondness for the Hebrew University.
When I started law school, it was the 5th year of the law school, and now many, many years later. So I still feel myself, my alma mater is the Hebrew University, of course. When I retired, they established a center, the Aharon Barak Center for Law and Economics, Law and Literature. etc. Which I, of course, have no influence in its running, but I know that it still exists. And I'm very happy that there is some connection between me and the law school in Jerusalem.
And you said your granddaughter is there now.
I have 11 grandchildren, but only one of them, and maybe the only one of them, enrolled into the Hebrew University for law and psychology. And I don't know what she likes more. But I know she's in law, but I was very, very proud when she told me the other day that she was also elected to be a member of the law review. That I was, as I told you, that I was instrumental in its establishment.
Final question. You celebrated a birthday a few days ago. You've been around for a while. These are very challenging times in this country. Are you optimistic?
Well, I reached the age of 89. I never believed that I'll come to this age. My true answer is that I should be realistic, not optimistic and not pessimistic, but realistic. But basically, I'm a realist person. And I do think that the people of a country are stronger than the leaders of the country. And the people of Israel are very strong people. They fight against terror. They fight against a very bad reform that the government wants to achieve. And I do think that the public of Israel is strong enough and clever enough to understand that if Israel wants to continue its role as a nation, not as a pariah among the nations, things have to change. And it's in the hand of the Israeli public to make this change. What will happen in the elections that we have in a year time, I have no idea.
1 century on, the story of the Hebrew University Law School is still unfolding, alongside Israel's own story. In the lecture halls on Mount Scopus, future judges and ministers are debating ideas, learning from the past and preparing for the future. Outside, in the public square, Israelis continue to debate what kind of country they wish to be. The institution that once educated Israel's founders now educates the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And as the struggle for Israeli democracy plays out, that institution, the humble law faculty that began in a monastery, remains a wellspring of knowledge, values, and courage for the battles yet to come. Thank you for listening to The View from Mount Scopus. Many thanks to executive producer Tal Kraoz, technical producer Tammy Goldenberg, the Hebrew University's Division for Advancement and External Relations, and its American friends. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It really does help. And if you know someone who'd love this episode, go ahead and share it with them. Join us again next time when we'll explore other facets of Hebrew University's past, present, and future. We hope you'll join us, and until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.